So, onto this. California Governor Gavin Newsom's wife, Jennifer Siebel, is speaking out about President Trump's recent firings of Attorney General Pam Bondi and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. Now, she claims that they are part of the president's, quote, war on all women. Watch.
It's no surprise to me that the first two prominent people pushed out of this administration were women. Women are brought in, packaged Mar-a-Lago style, and lifted up as long as they commit to wholeheartedly serve the interests of the patriarch at the top. There's no secure place inside this hand-picked patriarchal body that systemically disrespects, devalues, and discriminates against women and girls. Regardless of your political affiliation, you might want to wake up and see this for what it truly is. It's a war on all women.
Some major outlets reacting over the weekend to those claims. The California Post saying this: first partner Jennifer Siebel Newsom's war on women attack falls flat. Daily Mail following up with Gavin Newsom's woke wife claims Bondi and Noem were fired in Trump's war on all women, despite them being packaged up Mar-a-Lago style. And finally, the New York Post calling the California governor's wife a nuisance.
So let's be real for a second. If you're looking ahead to 2028, there's a very strong chance we're going to be hearing a lot about California Governor Gavin Newsom. And in my view, that's where things start to get interesting, because on paper, he's going to try to present himself as a polished, middle-of-the-road candidate who can appeal to the whole country. But when you actually look at what's going on, something doesn't quite add up. And that's what people are starting to notice, because here's the reality. If he runs in the Democratic primary, that's one thing. But if he makes it through and has to face the entire country in a general election, that's a completely different situation. And that's where his biggest problem shows up. And it's not complicated. His record. Think about it. California is supposed to be one of the most resource-rich, opportunity-filled states in the country. And yet, what do we keep seeing? Rising cost of living, people leaving in large numbers, small businesses struggling, housing getting more and more out of reach for everyday families. This isn't abstract. This is real life. This is what people deal with every day. And from my perspective, that's directly tied to the kind of policies that have been pushed over the last several years. And that leads to the second issue that's starting to get attention. And honestly, it's something most people probably didn't expect to matter this much, but it does. His wife, Jennifer Newsom, has been out there speaking publicly, doing events, and clips from those appearances are starting to spread online. And people are paying attention because what she's saying doesn't exactly line up with this idea that Gavin Newsom is some kind of moderate. In fact, it's doing the opposite. It's reinforcing the perception that the worldview behind these policies is much further to the left than what's being presented. And this is where it gets important, because voters aren't just looking at campaign slogans. They're looking at the bigger picture. They're asking, what does this actually look like in real life? And what do these beliefs turn into when they become policy? And when those questions start getting asked, especially on the national stage, that's when things that's when things can shift quickly. Because at the end of the day, you can say you're a moderate. You can try to position yourself however you want. But people are going to look at what's been done, who you surround yourself with, and what's actually being said when the cameras are rolling. And right now, those clips are raising some serious questions. So hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and then I want you guys to check this out.
So,
our boys' dolls, even if they tear the head off, I've given them dolls to learn that care and caregiving is not just an activity that's reserved for women, but that it's also an activity that is a responsibility of men. What I've done with both my daughters and my sons is, if I'm reading a book and the protagonist is a male, I just change the he to a she. And it just normalizes for my sons in particular. I don't even just do it for my girls. I do it for my sons because I want them to see that women can be the center of a story, that women matter, that women are interesting. At the end of the day, we're all kind of like in this place in history maybe where we're recognizing what it is to ultimately deconstruct all these gender roles and ultimately be human. And that's exciting to me. So, I'll just continue to kind of do my work and try and deconstruct all of these like limiting narratives about ultimately what it means to be human. Like,
let's be real for a second. When people watch these clips, The reaction is pretty simple. Wow, what exactly is being pushed here? And what does that mean in real life? Because what's being said isn't just casual conversation, it's a worldview. And from my perspective, it raises some serious questions about where this kind of thinking leads. Take the censorship point, right? The idea being floated is that if there were more right kinds, right kinds of voices inside tech companies, more alignment with a certain ideology.
Every problem that we have in society right now will be fixed when women come together and partner with our male allies and other allies. But when more women are in the rooms making decisions, changing the status quo, and transforming not just our culture, but our society and our economy. I'll give you one example. Look at Silicon Valley. Had more women been early on in those companies or at the tables of power making decisions, I don't think we would have so much or have allowed for so much sort of bigotry, racism, misogyny, and hate online. I don't think that we would have the anonymity of it. I think that there would have been ooh, that's unkind. That's not okay. You can't make money off of that, about dividing people, misinforming people, belittling people, bullying people. I mean, again, think about who's the victims online more often than not. It's women, LGBTQ+, marginalized communities, women of color.
So censorship, right? The idea being floated that if there were more right kinds of voices inside tech companies, more alignment with a certain ideology, then speech that people disagree with would be limited or filter out. And that somehow that's a good thing. It also, I throw out an example, family. What's the difference between the Democratic Party ostracizing people for having a difference of opinion if they don't constantly say the talking points that the Democratic Party want them to hear? Right? I mean, take Donald Trump, for example. The mainstream liberal media, CNN, MSNBC, now known as MS Now, um, we could do CNN, ABC, MSNBC, now known as MS Now, all of those mainstream media outlets. When they disagree with Trump, they just oppose Trump and then constantly continue to spew any type of intent to surround a narrative around him failing in any type of way. His health, God forbid, anything negative, pessimistic. So just because, for example, he may say, and he's known for saying this, you guys can see it for yourself, no men and women sports. Just because the ideology is that it can be remixed into an idea that there can be both individuals, such as women being in women being in men's sports and men being in women's sports. So just because Donald Trump has an opposing view, this is just an example. Can we say that he gets bullied by the mainstream liberal media for basically saying something that's basically against the division that the Democratic Party is basically spewing? Isn't it divisive when you try to basically split up the unity of unified sports within the same gender so individuals can compete with their own gender biologically to have fair, equal, competitive play in regards to whatever niche of sports they play in? Hmm. Let me know what you guys think. We just having a conversation. I just find it mind blowing because to me it comes off that she's basically um, promoting censorship only when it's biased, only when it's agreeable, only when you agree with how, in this case, she's speaking to women or about women. If women condemn something as just being flat out bad, then you censor it. But if it's something that you say that agrees with women running tech companies and they filtering out or basically controlling the internet, then you're okay because you're saying the things that they want you to say. But if the difference of opinions, it takes away the uniqueness of different mindsets, different cultures, because that's what the beauty of America is about, right? The unity of embracing different cultures, from food to music to clothing, just the unity of loving each other. And also understanding that we can have difference of opinions, but we also can pour into each other with different values that we can uplift each other in certain ways that we feel or see fit individually, right? So you may disagree with this conversation, right? But at the end of the day, you can still find a fine line between right and wrong. That's kind of obvious and factual, being objective and taking out your emotions. That men are men, women are women, born and being a boy or being a girl, right? When a woman gives birth, you have a boy or a girl. Facts, right? We could keep it that simple. So I'm saying, taking it a step further, having this conversation, to me, she's basically saying censorship is coming off as of, truthfully, honestly. And think about that in real life. You got a small business owner in places like San Diego or Sacramento trying to advertise online, or a parent sharing opinions about their kids' school policies. And now the question becomes, who decides what's susceptible to say? Who draws that line? Because once you open the door to censorship based on viewpoint, it doesn't stay contained. It expands. And historically, that's something Americans across the board have been very cautious about, is my point. If with all my examples and everything I said, then there's the parenting angle, which is where a lot of people watching this are probably scratching their heads. The example is being shared from this clip that we just watched, changing pronouns and stories, intentionally reshaping how kids understand basic roles, are being presented as a way to broaden perspective. And to be fair, the idea of teaching kids respect and empathy is something most people agree on. But here's where it doesn't add up for a lot of families. When you take something that's already simple for a child to understand and you start to actively altering it, parents start asking, what's the goal here? What does this look like when my kid is trying to make sense of the world? Think about a typical household. You got parents just trying to raise their kids with clear values, structure, and stability. They're not looking to complicate things. They're just trying to make things make sense. So when they hear about approaches that seem to blur basic concepts early on, it creates concern, not because people are against fairness or opportunity, but because they don't want unnecessary confusion introduced in their kids' lives. And this ties into the broader political point, which is where things get even more serious, because at the same time, there's talk about reshaping how kids think about identity and roles, as she mentioned, Gavin Newsom's wife here in this clip. And there's also this push for government to step in when it comes to what young people are exposed to politically, especially online. The argument is that intervention is needed to prevent certain types of radicalization, keyword. But again, think about how that plays out. Who defines what counts as too far? Who decides what a young person is allowed to hear or not hear? Because once government starts stepping into that space, it's no longer just about guidance, it's about control over information. And for a lot of Americans, that's where the alarm bells start going off. So when you pull all of this together, what people are reacting to isn't just one comment or one clip, it's the bigger picture. It's what these ideas look like when they move from conversations into policies, into systems, into everyday life. And that's why these moments are getting attention, because people are trying to figure out what kind of direction this represents and whether that's something they actually want shaping the country moving forward, right?
Boys, we all know, I think, or increasingly are realizing that boys are moving away from sort of the more progressive boys that spend time online, are moving a little bit. I'm trying not.
Boys are moving away from the Democrat Party, basically. They're moving away from the far left Democratic Party and they're going Republican, in simple words. And think about what's actually really being said here, because this is where a lot of people start to feel like things just don't line up. On one hand, there's frustration being expressed about young people, boys specifically, speaking to what she's speaking to, drifting away from certain political views, especially from progressive ideas. And the concern seems to be, why aren't they thinking the way we want them to think? That's basically what she's feeling and she's saying, and so do the words. But on the other hand, there's a willingness to reshape how those same kids understand basic things about the world from a very early age. From my perspective, that's where people start asking fair questions. Why is one kind of influence seen as dangerous, but the other kind of influence is seen as necessary or even good? That's the disconnect. And let's keep this grounded in real life. Parents across the country, whether you are in Texas, Florida, or even parts of California, are dealing with this exact tension. They're trying to raise their kids with a clear sense of right and wrong, or of right and wrong, a basic understanding of reality, and the ability to think for themselves. Critical thinking, which we learn from school, or I learned from school, me being a 1999 baby, we learned critical thinking. It was very crucial. Who, what, where, why, how. Most parents aren't looking to program their kids politically one way or the other. They want their kids to grow up, look at the world, and make their own decisions. That's the goal. Independently, right? Thinking for themselves. So when they hear messaging that suggests the government or institutions should step in to guide kids away from certain political ideas, that raises red flags. Because now it's not just parenting anymore. It's influence at a much larger level. And this is where the Constitution comes into play. The First Amendment exists for a reason. It protects the free exchange of ideas, even the ones people don't like, especially the ones people don't like. The founders understood that once you start limiting speech based on what's considered acceptable at the moment, you are on a slippery slope. And what's acceptable today might not be acceptable tomorrow. And whoever holds that power gets to decide. That's a big deal. Now, to be fair, there are people on the other side who argue that kids today are exposed to a lot online. And not all of it is healthy or helpful. That's a real concern. And most people can agree on that at some level. But the question is how you deal with it. Do you handle it at the family level with parents guiding their kids? Or do you bring in government and large institutions to step in and shape what kids are allowed to see and think? From my perspective, that's where a line needs to be drawn. Because once that door opens, it doesn't just apply to one side, it applies to everything. And when you look at the bigger picture, what people are reacting to isn't one personality or one viral clip. It's about a broader direction. It's about whether the country moves towards more centralized control over ideas and upbringing, or whether it sticks with the principle that individuals and families should have that responsibility. And that's the real issue underneath all of what she's saying right now. And it's why these conversations are getting so much attention right now.
Be political here, but are moving to the right and being sort of influenced by the Andrew Tates and some of that sort of alt-right socialization online that we know is very, very dangerous. My husband and I were alarmed when our kids were watching sports online and my son knew about Andrew Tate and thought he was pretty cool and thought that his Republican grandfather, who's not a Trumper, but a fiscal conservative, thought that my father would like Andrew Tate. So that's scary. We're like one of the most progressive households, and our son is confused and asking all these questions. We're working on legislation to hold tech companies accountable and help them be a force for good in our kids and families' lives, to really provide all the best in class resources and support for youth so that they don't go down this rabbit hole of very, very dangerous and limiting narratives around ultimately what it means to be a girl and what it means to be a boy. We owe it to them and ourselves to kind of heal this gift of modern technology, but curb it to be a force for good. I mean, look, the Gov and I, we have 3 more years. We're trying to institutionalize our values so that they carry on beyond our term.
Institutionalize their values. Keep that in mind. She said it, not me. That tells you all you need to hear. If you hear a person talk long enough, you'll see what they represent. And that tells you right there, it seems to me, prioritize censorship and control to institutionalize, to make people think the way we want them to think. And the way we can do that is basically condemning them if they think any differently. But forget how they're being stretched thin, the homelessness running rampant, the crime running rampant in California, the high cost of living, individuals trying to make ends meet, they penny pension. Forget all of that. But we want to institutionalized, and that we can stretch them thin and we can control them by any way, shape, or form. Because think about it. The low income, the middle class, right? They can't just up and flee. So they have to deal with whatever decisions they make. And they ultimately suffer based on the decisions of the aftermath or whatever. They basically deal with the aftermath, and they deal with the impact of the current administration in California, in this case, Gavin Newsom and his woman, because she is a reflection of him. Behind every strong man is a strong woman. So it has to be, and she said they are a progressive household. So obviously they have their influences impacting each other, being on the same page with their progressive institutionalized ideologies. So I'm saying all this that sometimes people will put people in a corner, and in this case, they're doing it in the form of policies by making their constituents suffer so they continue to work in the favor of them, institutionalizing them. Those who cannot get up and flee, like the wealthy with resources. So let's bring this all together. I'm just giving you how she's saying it and breaking it down, because this is where everything starts to make sense in a very real, practical way. When you hear phrases like holding tech companies accountable or making them a force for good, it sounds nice at first. It sounds harmless. But think about what that actually means when you translate it into real life. See, I'm just breaking it down so you can think for yourself and we just having a conversation. What it usually leads to is more pressure on platforms to control what people can say, what they can share, and what viewpoints are allowed to spread. In my view, that's just a softer way of talking about censorship. And once again, the big question is, who decides what good is? Because that standard isn't fixed. It changes depending on who's in power. Now, and tie that back to bigger political picture. If someone is running for president and trying to present themselves as a moderate, voters are going to look beyond the campaign messaging. They're going to look at the full environment around that person, the policies, the track record, and the ideas being openly supported. And you know the track record when it comes to California and Governor Gavin Newsom. They focus on the presidential run, and they're not even governing. They can't even govern a state effectively, let alone they're trying to shoot for the stars to a country. It's called crawl before you walk, baby, and you got to make it make sense. And that's where people start connecting the dots and they start asking, does the moderate image match what's actually being said and supported behind the scenes? Because at the end of the day, leadership isn't just about speeches during election season. She just told you what the Newsom family household is about. Think about putting that type of influence already in a political seat, but a bigger political seat. That take it as what you do, as what you may. The proof is in the pudding based on track record. So think about states like California, where a lot of these ideas have already been tested, is my point. You got ongoing debates about regulation, speech, education, and the role of government in everyday life. Some people support that direction, no question, but a lot of others look at the results and feel like it's going too far, especially when it starts affecting basic freedoms or adding more pressure to already complicated systems. That's why she has a disliking for young men waking up to the reality and understanding realistically that their policies, young men who will be shaping this country, who will go off to be servicemen, and young women as well, who will go off to fight for this country and go into different professions. You have to understand, she is concerned because what are most infrastructures? Who build most infrastructures and take on the most dangerous jobs in America? I'm not saying women don't, but majority we speaking to, not the minority. Majority of men, when it comes to building these big skyscrapers and infrastructure, are men. So if they're realizing that the policies is too woke, and basically she's condemning that, hey, I don't like the masculinity standpoint of leadership taking place. We need to institutionalize this and change this, right? So then she used Andrew Tate, who I don't agree with everything Andrew Tate said. You know, I don't really listen to him. I'm aware of him, but Andrew Tate basically personifies this message from my understanding of him. You're a man. Pick your boots up by your bootstraps, and you, at the end of the day, you get what you work for. And if you don't work, you don't eat. Right? and being realistic to your situation, logically, not emotionally, and go out there and get it and be ambitious and make good of with yourself and make something out of yourself. Moving with purpose. That's what the message Andrew Tate, when I have seen a couple videos of him come across. Not messing around. So if she's against that, then obviously it seems as though it's more, okay, control, don't think for yourself and don't have no sense of purpose. We decide what the sense of purpose and what type of role you should play in your purpose and what you should be doing, which we deem acceptable. It's not about one speech or one moment. It's about the pattern, I'm saying, family. It's about whether the country continues moving toward more control over speech and culture, or rather it leans back toward individual freedom, open debate, and personal responsibility. And from my perspective, that's the choice in front of voters. And people are paying closer attention now because they've seen what these ideas look like when they're actually put in practice. It can be very dark and very demonic. So as we move forward, the real question is simple. What kind of system do we live under, and who do we trust to shape that direction? If you made it this far, drop your thoughts in the comments, share the video with someone who's been following this conversation, and stay tuned because there's a lot more to unpack. Catch you next one, family. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. But before I go, I want to finish this. I got something on my mind right now. Let's finish this out by really focus on what was just said. Because this is one of those moments where you don't have to guess what someone believes. They're telling you directly. When you hear a statement like we are trying to institutionalize our values so they carry on beyond our term, that word right there, are, that's the key. That's not neutral. That's not moderate. See, the simple fact is to remove the emotionality, to remove the emotions and all that, and to continue to let logic trump emotions. You have to keep confronting with truth, because with truth come conviction, and it may be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, what is productivity? What is purpose without understanding that there's going to be discomfort or uncomfortable times? But through those times, they will propel you for greatness in a direction when it comes to be in the right direction as a country, as a people, as a state, right? And within its constituents and citizens. So I'm saying, when you see, the key word is "are." When she said we are trying to institutionalize our values so they carry on beyond our term, that's a clear signal. There's a specific set of beliefs they want embodied into systems, into policy, into institutions that last long after they're gone. And from my perspective, that's exactly why people are paying attention to these clips, because it gives you a clear picture of what this actually looks like beyond campaign speeches. Think about it in real life. When policies get institutionalized, that means they show up in schools and regulations and what's allowed to be said and how things are taught. It's not temporary. It sticks. And that's why voters take this seriously and should take this seriously, because it impacts the next generation. And you want to make sure, as a country, our children, the most purest of the purest, continue to go in the right direction to benefit from this amazing country, United States of America, and all its glories and all its luxuries, all of its privileges, all of its beauties, and what it stood on for those who have fought on the backs for us to enjoy our little bubbles that we have, and not let it be chaotic and confused or misconstrued into confusion instead of order, and with the individual freedoms that we are blessed with, right? We are granted, and when you connect it all back to California, you're not talking about theory. You're talking about a state where a lot of these ideas have already been put in practice, both economically and socially. High cost of living, heavy regulation, ongoing debates about education and speech, high taxes, can't leave nothing for your kids, no estates, no American dream to pass down generational homes, no ownership whatsoever. People see that and they draw their own conclusions. Now, I'm saying all this to get your mind and your juices flowing to understand the beauty of why, and no country is perfect, but why America, the United States of America, would have it been founded on, right? The American dream wasn't coined for no reason, because the beauty was you were able to leave your kids with something. And the whole time you sacrificed as an adult for the greater good so your kids was well off. So you have to understand also that your vote, your local legislators, because if I had to tell you to decide, should you vote for your local legislators or the president, I'm going to tell you your local legislators, because as you can see with California, they shape your lives and your kids' lives, and also what's being poured into their minds when it comes to schools, institutions, right? And now you have a politician, Gavin Newsom, current governor of California, wife, speaking on behalf as if she is to be first lady. Take heed and understand what's going on. You have to seek understanding in all you do to get the foresight to understand how to continue to make the right decisions, understanding right from wrong, and also use your critical thinking to understand to vote the right way, righteously. Now, and if you bring that into a national conversation, like I said, high cost of living, heavy regulation, ongoing debates about education and speech, people see that and they draw their own conclusions. Now, if someone comes forward in 2028 and says, I'm a moderate, Gavin Newsom, but the track record and the surrounding messaging point in a different direction, voters are going to question it. And they have every right so. They're going to look past the branding and focus on what's actually been done and what's being openly supported. And to be fair, there are people who support these kind of policies. They believe a more active role from government in shaping culture and guiding social outcomes is a good thing. That's a real viewpoint. But looking at the climate today, when you see no dictator and things like that, wouldn't government control and government shaping culture and guiding social outcomes, would it come off as sort of dictatorship to you instead of individual freedoms? Let me know. But there's also a large group of Americans who look at that and say that's not the role of the government. That's my point. Right? We are in a constitutional republic, not a democracy. If they believe in individual responsibility, parental authority, and constitutional limits, especially when it comes to speech and personal freedoms for individuals that they feel as though that's not the role of the government. And I always like to tie it back to the founding fathers. I'm not editing this out either. Founding fathers, right? Because we are a constitutional republic. That's where the divide is. And that's why this matters going forward, because elections aren't just about personalities, they're about direction. And what kind of country are we building? How much influence should government have over everyday life? And are we being honest about what these policies are actually look like once they're in place? See, we don't want history to repeat itself. We want to learn from the flaws of history so we continue to go in the right direction. For everyone, for the greater good. And from my perspective, those are the questions people need to keep asking, especially as more of these conversations come into the spotlight. So as I always want to hear from you, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video with someone who's been following this topic, and make sure you stay engaged, because these conversations, these discussions aren't slowing down anytime soon. I had to get that off my chest because it was just on my heart right now. Now, and I'm officially out, family. I'll catch you next one. Thank you guys for rocking with me. Peace.